You'd think living next to an HOA would guarantee peace and order. It didn't, not when Karen Lancaster reigned over Cypress Hill Estates. I owned a 10-acre spread that shared a border with the HOA's manicured subdivision. My land was old, raw, and mine in every meaningful sense. No architectural committees, no dues, no endless lists of approved paint colors. Just open skies, a sturdy farmhouse, and a deep, industrial-grade well I'd installed years back. To Karen, though, I was an eyesore. She didn't care that my land wasn't part of her kingdom. She cared only that it existed untamed, inconvenient, and impossible for her to control. At first, it was petty, snide remarks at the grocery store, anonymous complaint letters stuffed in my mailbox about property values and community standards. I shrugged it off. I figured she'd get tired once she realized I wasn't beholden to her. But Karen wasn't the type to get tired. She was the type to escalate. What she didn't know, or refused to understand, was that Cypress Hill Estates depended on me far more than I could ever depend on them. Years earlier, when the subdivision was still a blueprint, the developers had hit a snag: no viable municipal water supply. Drilling their own well was prohibitively expensive. So they approached me, the guy who owned the land they desperately needed to skirt, and struck a deal. In exchange for a generous monthly fee, I allowed them to tap into my well. Legally binding, ironclad, and essential. Their entire community flowed from my tap. It was a quiet arrangement. Most residents didn't even know. The HOA board did, though. And as far as they were concerned, it was a small price for endless lawns, sparkling pools, and a sense of suburban bliss. Karen didn't see it that way. In her mind, I was just a stubborn old relic, refusing to bend to her vision of perfection. And one humid Saturday morning, she made her move. I woke early, as I always did, to tend to my animals and check the irrigation lines. As I stepped outside, a metallic scent hit me, wet earth and something sharper, like raw iron. My boots splashed into a growing puddle, and my heart sank. The main pipes leading from my well had been severed. Not broken. Not cracked by some freak accident. Cleanly, surgically cut, as if someone had taken a handsaw and gone to work in the dead of night. For a moment, I just stood there, listening to the furious hiss of water pumping uselessly into the dirt. Then I noticed the note, pinned to my fence post with a piece of hot pink tape. Maybe now you'll finally do the right thing and move. The real Cypress Hill community. There was no signature, but there did need to be. The looping, aggressive cursive, the sheer entitlement practically vibrating off the page. It all screamed Karen Lancaster. Anger flickered through me, sharp and immediate. This wasn't just vandalism. This was an attack. An attempt to bully me off my own land, to force compliance through destruction. I grabbed the valve wrench and fought to shut off the flow, cursing under my breath. Mud splattered up my jeans. Water gushed and frothed around my boots. Every second that passed meant more wasted supply, more damage. But even as I wrestled the valve closed, a colder, more calculating part of me was already working. Karen thought she'd scared me. She thought a few broken pipes and a petty threat would be enough. She didn't know the first thing about me. She didn't know about the contract still sitting in my safe, legal and ironclad. She didn't know that her act of sabotage had just triggered a clause so severe it would leave Cypress Hill Estates, her precious, perfect neighborhood, bone dry and scrambling. She didn't know that by attacking my water supply, she'd attacked hers too. As the last drip slowed from the severed pipe, I straightened, wiped the mud from my hands, and stared out at the neat rows of cookie-cutter houses across the tree line. The war she wanted? It had just begun. And it would end with her drowning in the consequences. By noon, the sun was a hammer beating down on Cypress Hill's manicured lawns, and my property was a battlefield under reconstruction. I had shut down the well's main system, locked every access point, and triple-checked the surveillance cameras I'd wisely installed years ago. No more free-flowing water for my charming neighbors. No quiet lifeline feeding their sprinklers, showers, or pools. They could sweat under the same sun that baked my broken pipes dry. Inside my workshop, I dusted off a thick file labeled Cypress Hill Water Agreement. I laid it out carefully, the worn legal papers spreading like a general's battle map. Each signature from the original board members gleamed up at me, witnesses to a contract that spelled their doom if they dared cross me. And Karen had crossed that line in broad daylight. There it was, buried in the middle of the document. Clause 9C, immediate termination for any acts of sabotage or trespass. I didn't need a lawyer to tell me what came next. While I prepared my arsenal, Cypress Hill began to feel the first tremors of my retaliation. Across the road, sprinklers sputtered to a halt mid-cycle. Bright green lawns faded fast under the oppressive heat. Birds circled the drooping flower beds. I saw gardeners, usually busy pruning and watering, scratching their heads in confusion as hoses hung limp and useless. By late afternoon, a small delegation materialized at the end of my drive, 3 men in polo shirts and khaki shorts, clutching clipboards like shields. At their center, steaming with righteous fury, was Karen Lancaster herself. She didn't bother with greetings. "You need to restore service immediately," she barked, as if issuing a command to a wayward servant. I leaned against my fence post, crossing my arms. Service was conditional. Your board violated the terms. It's terminated. Karen's cheeks flushed and angry, mottled red. You can't just shut off water to an entire community. One of the clipboard holders, an older man with trembling hands, leaned in and whispered something urgently into her ear. She swatted him away like a fly. "We'll sue you," she hissed, stepping closer. I smiled, not wide, not taunting. Just calm, deliberate satisfaction. "I'd be happy to bring this to court," I said. "Maybe the judge will enjoy reading about vandalism, trespassing, and contractual negligence." Behind her, the 2 board members exchanged glances, worried, calculating. They hadn't come prepared for a real fight. They'd expected to intimidate me into submission. Bad miscalculation. Karen jabbed a manicured finger toward my property line. "You're endangering families. Children live here." I let the accusation hang in the hot air for a moment. "I didn't endanger anyone," I said. "You did. When you trespassed. When you destroyed my pipes." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. She opened her mouth, no doubt to unleash another tirade, but I raised a hand. "I suggest you leave now," I said quietly, before I add harassment to the list. The tension broke with a near-audible snap. The clipboard men tugged at Karen's sleeves, steering her away like handlers with a wild animal. I watched them retreat down the drive, an ugly storm brewing in their wake. But it wasn't just Karen's anger that mattered now. It was what would happen when the rest of Cypress Hill realized the truth, that their water wasn't a guaranteed right. It was a borrowed privilege, one they'd forfeited at the whim of a woman too arrogant to read the fine print. As evening fell, the chaos deepened. Across the road, garage doors opened and closed in frantic waves. Residents hauled in flats of bottled water, jugs, and coolers. Some tried to start generators or reroute their sprinkler systems. Others just paced their driveways, shouting into cell phones. Panic was setting in. Without water, the perfect suburban dream of Cypress Hill was crumbling, hour by hour, like a sandcastle under a rising tide. And Karen? She had no solutions. Only rage. I stood at the edge of my property as the sun dipped low, watching her storm back and forth across her driveway, barking orders to anyone who dared approach. No one stayed long. The spell of her authority was breaking, and fast. Tomorrow, I knew, would bring more visitors. Desperate ones. And when they came, they'd understand exactly who they were dealing with, and exactly who they owed for every drop they'd taken for granted. By morning, Cypress Hill Estates was a pressure cooker ready to blow. I sipped coffee on my porch, watching the neighborhood unravel across the road. Sprinklers remained dead. Pools shimmered eerily still, their filtration systems shut down. Dust kicked up from dried lawns as early summer heat gnawed away at the edges of their manicured world. It didn't take long for the first wave to arrive. A black SUV with a gold HOA emblem on the door, a ridiculous touch Karen had insisted on, rolled up to my gate. Out stepped Douglas Reed, the HOA's treasurer, clutching a leather folder to his chest like a lifeline. He raised a hand in greeting, his smile already cracking at the edges. "Morning," he said, voice tight. "Mind if we talk?" I nodded once, stepping down from the porch, but making no move to open the gate. Douglas cleared his throat. "Look, this situation. It's gotten a little out of hand. Karen may have acted impulsively." He grimaced as if the words pained him. I let the silence stretch. Let him feel it. He glanced back toward the SUV, where 2 more board members sat sweating behind tinted windows. "No sign of Karen. She's been asked to step back," he said finally. "At least until this is resolved." A small crack, but a crack nonetheless. Douglas licked his lips nervously and opened the folder, revealing a hastily drafted settlement agreement. "We'd like to offer compensation for the damage to your property. Full repairs, plus an increased monthly fee for water access." He slid the folder through a gap in the gate, like a man feeding scraps to a dangerous dog. I didn't even look at it. "You know the contract," I said. Clause 9C. 1 violation, service terminated. Permanently. Douglas's shoulders sagged. "Come on," he pleaded. "There are over 200 families here. Kids. Elderly residents. You're punishing all of them for one person's mistake." I raised an eyebrow. "A mistake your board enabled. I don't remember hearing any of you condemn Karen when she harassed me for months. Or when she vandalized my property." He had no answer for that. Behind him, more cars trickled into the subdivision. Residents climbed out, forming small, tense clumps on the sidewalks. Some held protest signs, laughably fast production, while others simply looked bewildered, betrayed. A woman I recognized from a past confrontation with Karen, Mrs. Walsh, if memory served, broke from the crowd and marched straight toward Douglas. "This is on you," she snapped, jabbing a finger at him. "You, and that dictator you let run wild. My son needs water for his dialysis machine, and you're out here playing politics." Another resident, a wiry man with sunburned cheeks, chimed in. "You gonna pay for my landscaping bill, Reed? Hundreds of dollars, down the drain, because of her." The mob grew bolder with each accusation, their anger turning from abstract frustration to something sharper, more personal. Douglas floundered, holding up his hands. "Please, everyone, calm down. We're working on a solution." But it was too late. The trust that had bound them together, the fragile illusion of Karen's perfect community, was fracturing before his eyes. And I hadn't even said a word. I turned back toward my porch, deliberately slow, the message clear. Not my problem. Behind me, voices rose, overlapping in a cacophony of blame and desperation. As I stepped inside, I caught a final glimpse of Karen through my window, standing on her porch, arms folded, a scowl carved deep into her face. Her neighbors didn't look at her anymore with admiration or obedience. They looked at her like a queen whose crown had been knocked into the dirt. And she knew it. That night, the subdivision's social media page, once a curated feed of bake sales, HOA updates, and saccharine community events, exploded into open rebellion. Screenshots of angry posts floated across my phone, sent gleefully by a few former Karen loyalists now eager to throw her under the bus. Karen's reign of terror is over. Time for real leadership. Why are we paying the price for her vendetta? We need to vote the whole board out now. It was beautiful, poetic, exactly the justice Karen never thought would come for her. By the end of the night, an emergency HOA meeting had been called for the following evening. I had no intention of attending. I didn't need to. Karen's empire was already crumbling. And tomorrow, I would make sure the final blow came from the very people she once ruled. The next evening, Cypress Hill's clubhouse parking lot overflowed with restless bodies. I watched from a distance, parked on the ridge just outside the subdivision. The windows of my truck rolled down to catch every bitter note carried on the wind. Inside, the emergency meeting was already in chaos. Residents crowded the hall, waving papers and shouting over one another. The air buzzed with outrage, distrust, and betrayal. Karen sat rigidly behind the long oak table, flanked by the few remaining loyalists, all of them pale and sweating under the fluorescent lights. It was not a meeting. It was a trial. "Where's the accountability, Karen?" someone bellowed. "You cut a man's pipes and cost us our water," another screamed. "You should be arrested." Even Douglas Reed, formerly Karen's most obedient puppet, stood apart from her now, arms folded tightly, eyes hard. Karen rose to speak, but the room exploded in jeers before she could open her mouth. She tried to slam her gavel for order, but the sharp crack was swallowed by the noise. When she finally managed to shout above the din, her voice was shrill, desperate. "All of you are overreacting. This is still my community, and I—" "No." A voice rang out, clear, strong, cutting through the noise like a blade. "It never was yours, Karen. It belongs to us. And you're done." It was Mrs. Walsh, the mother whose son needed dialysis. She stepped forward, waving a packet of papers high in the air. "I move to dissolve the current HOA board effective immediately under Emergency Article 5. For a moment, silence reigned. Then came the chorus of seconded motions, louder, more urgent with every voice added. Karen's face collapsed inward, disbelief curdling into naked panic. "You can't do this. I built this community," she screeched. "No," someone else shouted back. "You built a prison. Now we're tearing it down." A hastily organized vote was held, paper ballots flying across the tables. Hands shot up, voices shouted aye, with the force of a tidal wave. The vote wasn't even close. Karen, stripped of authority in mere minutes, stood frozen as the newly elected interim board moved swiftly into action, passing motions left and right, each one dismantling the fortress she had spent years building. The final blow came swiftly. The board's new president, a sharp-eyed woman named Marla Ruiz, took the mic and cleared her throat. "There's also the matter of civil damages," Marla said coolly, "and criminal charges for vandalism." Karen staggered back, as if struck. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You're all ungrateful traitors. I'll sue every one of you." But no one listened. One by one, the residents turned their backs on her, a silent, damning verdict. Karen shrank, a queen dethroned without ceremony, vanishing into the shadows of her own crumbling empire. I leaned back in my truck seat, feeling the deep, unshakable satisfaction of a plan executed to perfection. Yet my job wasn't quite finished. The next morning, under a clear sky heavy with promise, a delegation arrived at my front gate. This time they didn't come with threats or demands. They came with humility. Marla Ruiz stood at the front, hands visible, posture deferential. Behind her, a half-dozen residents, young parents, retirees, even a few former Karen supporters, waited nervously. "We'd like to offer you a new contract," Marla said, voice steady. "Fair rates, full maintenance responsibility, absolute respect for your property." I studied them carefully. Gone were the sneers, the arrogance, the sense of entitlement. They had learned the hard way that the water they'd taken for granted, the lifeblood of their community, came not from blind authority, but from trust. And they had shattered that trust. I let the silence stretch long enough to make a few of them shift uneasily. Finally, I spoke. "I'm willing to talk," I said, "but on my terms." They nodded, eager, desperate. In the days that followed, the new agreements were signed under strict conditions. I maintained full control of the well. All future maintenance costs and upgrades were the HOA's responsibility. And most importantly, any act of vandalism, intimidation, or harassment would mean immediate, permanent cutoff again. No second chances. Cypress Hill learned to live by those terms. Karen, stripped of her influence, sold her house a month later, in a rushed, discounted sale that barely covered her mounting legal fees. Rumor had it she moved 3 states away, starting over in a rental. No HOA, no power. Just another forgotten name in the long story of people who thought they could control everything, until they couldn't. As for me, I returned to my peace, my land, my freedom. And every morning, when I watched the sun rise over Cypress Hill's neatly trimmed houses, their sprinklers dutifully misting the air in silent gratitude, I smiled. They would never forget who truly held the keys to their kingdom. And neither would I.